So in this lecture, we'll discuss Facebook's photo storage. The title of the paper is A Needle in a Haystack. So a haystack is a large storage. A haystack is essentially a stack of hay, and a needle is a very small needle, which is very hard to find if it is inside a haystack. So in this case, the haystack is the photo storage, and the needle is a single photo, which needless to say is very hard to find. So we will discuss an overview of the approach and then the design and the evaluation. So this paper is around 10 years old, it's slightly dated. So as of 2010 also Facebook was very big. It had 260 billion images, which was very large for that time, even for now as well. Users would upload a billion photos a week, which would roughly be the order of 60 terabytes. And the haystack system, which was a new and improved approach. In this approach, this was replacing the traditional approach, which was use the network file system NFS. This reduced the number of disk accesses because the main problem with a traditional file system like NFS was the increased number of disk accesses. So this is something that the aim was to explicitly reduce. And also the aim was to minimize per photo metadata because we would keep some data for the photo as well as some metadata to essentially identify. So the main thing it would contain is the size and the status of the photo. And of course, something like its starting position on the disk. So the starting position, the size, and the status, we'll come to what the status is later in the lecture. These three things, the size, the status, and the starting position of a photo, these are essentially things that need to be minimized. And also we need to serve a million images per second, which was Facebook's peak serving rate those days. So that's the reason they had to create a novel custom bespoke solution, uh, a photo object store, essentially a store only for photos. So this was known as Haystack. And Haystack, of course, is in the line of things that we have been, in a sense, studying over now. So we have looked at a few projects that essentially use the same elements. So we have looked at Percolator, Google Percolator, which is built on Bigtable. So essentially there is a distributed file system and there is a DHT, some form of it. We have also seen Coda, which is a distributed file system. And then we have discussed Dynamo, which is again a one hop DHT. And then we discussed Cassandra, which was for the inbox search problem. So of course in the inbox search we are looking at small messages, right, not large photos. So if a viewer were to ask why we can't use Cassandra to store photos, well, Cassandra is not meant for that. Cassandra, the main aim of Facebook Cassandra was to store small messages, not large photographs, right? That was not the aim. In this case it is. So Facebook saves each photo in 4 formats. So the formats are large, medium, small, and thumbnail. So these four, so essentially every photo that we create, it is stored in these 4 formats. And let's say we apply, some sort of a transition to a photo, like we rotate it, then essentially we create a new photo, right? So similar to our previous assumptions, we assume the data is immutable. Immutable means that it does not change. and so which means that we write once and we read many times. And if I were to create a new version of it, like rotate it, so essentially that is like uploading a new photo, which is the same pattern. It is written once, never modified, and also it's rarely deleted, in the sense that we very rarely delete photos from Facebook. uh, unless a photo has been uploaded in error, we typically do not delete photos. So any POSIX file system, what is a POSIX file system? Well, the Linux and Windows file system, so Linux ext3, ext4, so the Linux and Windows file systems, these file systems are POSIX compliant file systems. So they have a lot of overheads. It's okay for a general file system, but it is not the best solution for a specific, for something, for storing a specific kind of data, specific type of data. So what adds to the overhead? Well, we have directories. That adds to the overhead, in the sense that the file systems support a very hierarchical system. So that adds to the overhead. The further thing is that we store a lot of additional data, like permissions and so on, which are not required. Right? So for storing photos, we don't require directories, we don't require permissions. There are problems with traditional NFS distributed version of a POSIX file system. In a sense, we need several accesses to read a file, not one, several. So given the file, we have to retrieve the inode number by traversing the directory tree, then read the data. Even if we do caching, it does not help a lot in reducing disk accesses. So the requirements that we have for a photo object store, the requirements are high throughput and low latency, right? It's not high throughput and high latency as was the case in other approaches, which was like a more of a batch processing, right? So in that case, you need high throughput and high latency, right? When you typically don't not care how long it takes, but this is not the aim here, right? The aim here is a very high throughput and a low latency. And so basically for that, we have to essentially create a very tiered system that would allow this. So first we define a certain processing capacity, which means a certain quality of service for a server, which essentially talks about the maximum number of requests that can be served per cycle. So if you're exceeding this, we can ignore messages. Not a good idea. Or what we can do is we can have Facebook system, and we can have something like Corona or Akamai, a content distribution network. So what the CDN does is the CDN is a set of third-party servers which essentially buffers Facebook data, some of the popular data, and it serves that to the users. All right. So in this case, what the CDN actually does is that it acts like a cache for Facebook. It takes popular data and it serves it to the users. And so the CDN is a third party offering. And so in this case, whatever is popular can be served. But the main problem, and you would also see this in the paper, that if I were to plot kind of the popularity on the y-axis and order the Facebook pages on the x-axis, the graph would be something like this. So let's say you will have a set of very popular Facebook pages, mainly for celebrities, politicians, But for most people, most normal users, and mind you, this will be a massive tail, you really have a long, long, heavy tail of just regular normal users. So their photographs will not be extremely popular. As a result, the caching strategy of the CDN will not really help. So it will essentially help for the celebrity part, but for the regular normal users, we need to use the default Facebook system. Alright. So this is the two-layered architecture, or this is the two-layered structure of Facebook and CDN, where the CDN is third party, as I said, like Corona or Akamai, which serves the more popular pages, Facebook pages, of course. But we need Facebook's indigenous haystack system for the rest of the requests, and they have to be served with a high throughput and a low latency. We have some additional requirements as well, that we only want one disk operation per read, not many, not more than one. And also another recurrent pattern that we have been seeing is that all the metadata of a file that needs to be stored in main memory, right? Such that the metadata at least can be accessed very quickly. So the metadata gets stored in the main memory cache and the rest on disk. But there also we are allowed a single access. Fault tolerance, well, this is also a recurrent pattern that we have seen. We saw that in Amazon Dynamo, where the replication was across data centers. So this is required because if one data center fails, we would like another data center to take over. Furthermore, even within a data center, we would like to have replication across racks, such that if one set of racks fail, another set of racks can take over. So with all of these modifications, Haystack registers a 4x throughput improvement over baseline NFS, and the cost per terabyte, of data, serving a terabyte of data, is 28% less, which is substantial for a server farm. So now we need to understand where these numbers come from and what exactly did Facebook do to get such a large improvement in throughput and also simultaneously at a lower cost. So this is the typical flow of kind of a simplistic uh, Facebook system. So in this case, the web browser actually requests the web server for a photo or for a set of photos on a page. The web server replies, but it does not reply with the photo. It replies with a kind of an internal Facebook URL. The internal Facebook URL is sent to the CDN, which acts as a cache for the photo storage, which acts for a cache for Haystack. If the CDN has the data, it returns it. Otherwise, it forwards the request to the photo storage, which then retrieves the photo from the Haystack storage and returns it via the CDN. Some of the popular photos may be cached by the CDN for later users. So let us now look at the default approach that uses a distributed file system, NFS. So as we have discussed, using CDNs, content distribution networks, is not an effective solution. The primary reason being that requests have a very long tail. The popularity distribution has a very long tail. And the CDN caches only the most popular photos. So most requests are anyway sent back to the backing photo store, which in this case is Haystack. Furthermore, what NFS would do is that it would save each photo as a file on a commercial NAS appliance. So NAS appliance is a network storage appliance where the storage device is connected on the network and is accessible over the net. So what we are essentially doing is that in this case, given a URL, it is being mapped to some sort of a storage volume, and the data is coming from the path of the file. Of course, we can do a default implementation where we save hundreds of files per directory to kind of minimize the depth of the directory tree. This would require 3 disk accesses, read the directory metadata, right? So this is the first access, load the inodes of the file and read the file contents. So the optimization is that we can cache file handles. So caching file handles does not really help because of the heavy tailed nature, right? So this is not very helpful. Uh, and the reason is that for this range, which is very, very long, caching does not work. There are a few competing technologies like MySQL. Well, this is MySQL is meant for relational data. It's a relational database. The data that we are looking at here is not of a relational character, hence it's not useful. We have looked at the combination of GFS and Bigtable in Google Percolator. So in GFS, we divide a file into chunks, we replicate the chunks and store them on different servers. But in this case, we are dealing at the granularity of photos. So this is not a very scalable approach. Plus GFS tries to give us kind of a general file system, which is not what we want. And Bigtable is again built on top of GFS that takes a large multidimensional table, splits it into small chunks, replicates those chunks. Again, this is not the best solution for us because our data is not a multidimensional table. And we have already looked at the shortcomings of traditional NFS on NAS storage devices. So what we actually want to do is that we want to create a new kind of a file organization that uses elements that we have seen in the past. So we will store all the metadata of the file, which includes its position on the disk and its size and its status flags. So this in some sort of a easily searchable form, an index in RAM, and then the actual file will be stored, the actual photograph will be stored on disk. So of course we would like the RAM to disk ratio to be as high as possible, in the sense more the RAM the better it is. Of course there are substantial cost implications with a larger RAM, particularly in a very large data center. So the aim here is to find the right mix, the right balance, such that we can minimize the cost for creating the data center, as well as kind of maximize the RAM to disk ratio, right, at the same time. And as we have been discussing several times, the problem for serving user Facebook pages cannot be outsourced to CDNs. So for the Facebook pages of celebrities, yes, but not for regular users because of the heavy-tailed pattern. So the architecture of Haystack has 3 components: a store, a directory, and a cache. So we will discuss them in turn. So the store is the actual photo store that stores all the photographs. So what we do is that the entire photo store, which is of course a distributed store, is grouped into logical volumes. Think of this as a large directory, right? A large distributed. That is a logical volume, right? So this can be thought of as a large distributed directory. Each logical volume will be stored on several servers. So then each replica will be called a physical volume, right? So each logical volume, let me call it an LV, will be stored on multiple servers, right? On each of them, each replica will be called a physical volume. And needless to say, a single server will never have 2 replicas of the same logical volume because the aims of redundancy are not really being served. We then have a Haystack directory which actually does the overall control, which exercises the overall control in this process. So what the haystack directory does is it does a logical to physical mapping, in the sense, given the logical volume ID, gives you the physical volume ID, which essentially includes the ID of the machine that stores the physical volume, howsoever it is specified. Either IP address is the easiest. Second, given the photograph, it maps it to the logical volume. So what it essentially does is, given an identifier for the photograph, it maps it to the logical volume and further maps it to the physical volume, right? And from the physical volume, we find the machine that stores it. And what the machine actually gets is a tuple of the photograph and the logical volume, because the machine might be storing multiple physical volumes, right? One corresponding to each different logical volume. So this tuple is actually given to the machine such that it can find the photograph from within it. And what is the cache? Well, the cache is a DHT, a regular DHT that we have seen in the past, right? Something like pastry, Chord, Dynamo, etc. So it's a regular DHT which is an internal CDN of sorts, which can cache data and give it to you. But of course, it is not a small in-machine cache. It is a large distributed cache, and the large distributed cache is organized as a DHT. So let us now take the previous figure that we have shown and add some details into it, some extra details, some additional details into it. So one of the details is like this, that given our web browser, so essentially we open a Facebook page on a web browser. The web browser sends the request to the web server. The web server then sends the request to the haystack directory. So what does the request have? Well, the request has either, the identifier of one photo or multiple photos. Then what the haystack directory actually does is that the haystack directory then, the first decision that it takes is whether it should direct the user directly to the CDN or directly to the haystack cache. In the sense, one connection of this nature exists, where the user can be directly directed to the haystack cache by bypassing the CDN. And second, given a photo, it does the mapping photo to logical volume to physical volume to physically where the machine is. So this of course is not done by the haystack cache. So the haystack cache would only do this much of mapping, and what it would essentially return to the, sorry, this would be done with the haystack directory. This is something what it would return to the user. Well, also this would also be there. So these three things will get returned to the user. So user means the user's browser, and the user's browser can then send it to the CDN. If the CDN has the photo, then it will of course send it back. Otherwise, the CDN will send the request to the haystack cache. The haystack cache, as you can see from the structure, it is organized as like a DHT. And then if the haystack cache has the photo, well and good, that's great. Then the photo will be sent back to the photo will be sent to back to the user, or if it does not have it, it will send it to the haystack store. The haystack store will then search for the photo within the physical machine, and once it gets the photo, it will return the photo to the haystack cache, and the haystack cache will of course store it over here. So this at least takes care of some temporal needs. Then of course we have an option. It depends on what the directory has originally configured the request to be. So the first option is that it can be sent directly back to the user, directly back to the browser. And the other option is that it can be sent to the CDN for further caching, which is what we show in this figure. And after caching it, the CDN can return the result to the browser So this is completely a function of exactly how the request has been configured by the haystack directory where it actually goes first. So this is like, you can think of the request response cycle as having two distinct phases. So the first phase is where we talk to the directory, get an expanded URL for the photo, right? And then we make a fresh request uh, via the CDN cache and store. So the web servers use the directory to create a URL for each photo. So that is the job of the web server. And so then the URL that they create will be of this type. It will be HTTP because HTTP protocol is being used. So the first entry will contain an entry to the CDN. So it will be the IP address of the CDN, and so it will point the user to the CDN, and then the user's browser can retrieve the photo from the CDN. So what is being sent? Well, the logical volume and photo is being sent such that the CDN gets the first chance. However, if the CDN does not have it, then automatically it is sent to the cache. The CDN sends it to the haystack cache. If the cache has the logical volume photo tuple, it will return that to the user. If again the cache does not have it, it is sent to the physical volume, which is a physical machine within the haystack store. The physical machine will have it for sure. So it will again take a look at the logical volume photo. So logical volume, of course, within the physical machine is stored as a physical volume. And then it will look up the physical volume, find the photo and return. So the upload process is kind of analogous where the user contacts the web server contacts the haystack directory. So in this case, the directory's job is, so since it's a new photo, it's a fresh photo, the directory's job is to assign a writable logical volume. And so the writable logical volume, so these logical volumes are fresh, any logical volume can be assigned. So in this case, the directory assigns a writable logical volume. The web server on its part then sends a request to the haystack store. The store will write the new photo to all the physical volumes that store a replica of the logical volume. So let us now discuss the functionality of the haystack directory. So as we have discussed before, it provides a mapping from a logical volume to a physical volume. So this is like deciding which replica we need to send the request to. So note that in this case, since this is read-only data, it's immutable data, we don't really need a quorum. So we don't really need to read from a quorum of replicas. There is no version management, right? So version management and so on that we had in Amazon, all of this is not there, right? We just can send it to any one replica and read. And every single photo is protected by a checksum. So there are internal mechanisms of finding out if bits or bytes have been corrupted or not. So one of the things that the haystack directory does is that it does a load balancing of the writes across the logical volumes, which means that across all the logical volumes that are there, so let's say that a write needs to be done. So of course a write can be sent to any logical volume because it's a fresh photo. So since the write can be sent to any logical volume, so we need to choose that logical volume where there will be some load balancing. There is not a lot of traffic in any one volume, so it will do a load balancing. Also, it makes a determination if the request will be handled by the haystack cache or the CDN. If it's a popular page, it can be handled by the CDN. Else, it is directly sent to the haystack cache, or it might be sent to the haystack cache via the CDN. Also, It marks volumes as read-only once they fill up. So every logical volume has a capacity. So this is the maximum size of the logical volume. So once the logical volume fills up, the entire logical volume is kind of sealed and it is marked as read-only. This means that the logical volume will further not expand. So what we need to do is we need to start more machines and create new logical volumes, because as I said, every logical volume has a maximum size. So this means that to create more of these writable volumes to write new photographs, we need to start more machines. This means that the data center, Facebook's data center, has to continuously expand, has to grow. Because what was found out was that roughly 20 to 25% of the photographs are deleted. So in general, we do not delete photographs from our Facebook profile unless they have, of course, been uploaded in error. So since the photographs have to be deleted, I'm sorry, do not have to be deleted, Facebook's storage capacity keeps on increasing. That's the reason we have a cap on the size of a logical volume. And once we reach the cap, it is marked read only, and we we bring in more machines into our system. The haystack cache, well, it's very simple. It is organized as a regular DHT. The key is the photo's ID and the value is the photo's data. Of course, if an item is not there, it is sent to the store. So here there are some interesting, two interesting schemes that we should talk about. So the haystack cache, right, can get a request either from the CDN or from the user's browser directly, depending upon the way that the haystack directory has configured the request. So if it is coming from the CDN, then it caches a photo. If it is actually coming from the user, not from the CDN. The reason is that the CDN itself is a cache, so there is no reason why it should also cache the photo, because if CDN does not have a photo, it will anyway get it from the store and then the CDN will cache it. So there is no reason for us to cache it twice. But if the user is directly requesting the haystack cache, then it will cache the photo. The second is that it does not cache photos for read-only logical volumes. The reason is that a volume becomes read-only after a certain time. So this can be roughly, let's say, after 100 to 200 days. Once photos are not used anymore, we sort of configure the system such that the logical volume fills up and it becomes read-only. And at that point, what the engineers of Facebook actually saw is that we do not need to have quick access to these photos, because users very rarely look at photos that are more than 3 months or 6 months old. Right? Very rarely you'll take a look at them. So they are still a part of your Facebook profile, but they are not accessed that frequently. That's the reason there is no point in caching those photos. Hence, when a volume becomes read-only, we do not cache its photos. Only for write-enabled volumes that are in a sense holding more recent data, right, recent photos, we cache them in the haystack cache. Let us now come to the haystack store, which is the third component of our discussion. So each store machine will manage multiple physical volumes, where each physical volume actually corresponds to a different logical volume. So this is here is one of the key innovations of the Facebook engineers, that they designed a physical volume to be a single very large file, not multiple files. Otherwise, we would have had to do a directory access and get the details of that. It's a single file and it's a very large file. So in the large file, of course, the large file is organized as a stack. All right. So pretty much what we do is that we have the data for one photo over here, the data for the next photo, so on and so forth. So essentially, we just concatenate the photos, the data for the photos on the large file, and it is organized as a stack. So it is never the case that we delete a photo, there is a hole over here, we try to put in something. That's not done. So we essentially have immutable data, data that does not change. And like a regular stack, we just keep on adding photos this way into this very large file. So for accessing a photo on a machine, what we actually need is the logical volume ID, because that is how it will map it to the physical volume, which is this huge large file. The offset of the file, which is the starting index of the byte within this large file, and the size of the photo, which tells us how large is the photo, such that we only read this part from this large file. So this becomes the photo. So as you can see, the data organization is very simple. We have a large file where these photos are concatenated one after the other. The only thing that we need to store is first the ID of the file, which comes from the logical volume ID, the offset, which is the starting position, and the size of the photo, which is the end position within this file. Furthermore, the store machine, the machine that stores these volumes, keeps a mapping in memory mapping of photo IDs to the metadata, and metadata is this data. So from every photo ID to this metadata, there is a mapping, which is stored in memory, right? Quickly accessible, stored in memory. So this is similar this is a similar pattern that we have been seeing, where we keep the mapping in memory and the actual data, some of it in memory, most of it on the disk. Now let's come to the file structure. So as we have discussed, the physical volume is a huge, large file which is growing like a stack. So first it starts with something called the super block, which kind of identifies, has all the meta information regarding this, and a sequence of needles, where a needle is essentially one photo. Right, it's a sequence of needles. So each needle has the following fields. It has a header. So of course header identifies the name of the photo, type, and so on. Then it has an important field known as the cookie. So the cookie is a random number. The aim of the cookie is essentially to defeat a certain kind of attack. So imagine I have my Facebook profile, and in that, if let's say my photos are kind of named, www.facebook.com/srsarangi/1.jpg, 2.jpg, 3.jpg, it will become very easy to guess the IDs of photos. I can start doing bulk downloads, and I can, even if there's a little bit of laxity in security, I can guess the URLs of photos of other users. I can download them. We want to defeat that. So a cookie is a large number. So it's a 32 to 64 bit number. So this is a random number which is associated with each photo. So to get access to a photo, we kind of need to know its URL and also supply this random cookie, which you can think of it like a password for the photo. And only if the cookie matches, the photo is sent back. So this makes it hard to guess, right? This makes it hard to guess photo URLs, right? Because for every photo that we get, the cookie has to be supplied, and we will not know the cookie, right, unless we are a legitimate valid user, and the photo is also being accessed in a legitimate and valid manner. The browser will not have the cookie for a photo. Every photo internally is identified with a key and an alternate key. So the sum of the key and the alternate key is 96 bits. So that identifies a given photo. Then we have the flags field. So the flags field is very interesting. So we have till now maintained that a photo is not deleted, right? So if a photo is not deleted, then so that's the reason we have an ever growing list in one direction. But in practice, we can delete photos from Facebook, even though it is rare. But nevertheless, we can delete photos, we can delete entire albums from Facebook. This is possible to do. So in this case, we should have some mechanism to delete. And the mechanism is very simple. We keep a single bit, the delete bit. If this is set to 1, it means it's deleted. If the delete bit is set to 0, it means it's fine. So what we do is we keep a single status bit, a single status field within a flag. And so within the flags field of the needle. And to delete a photo, well, it's as simple as just saying that we have set a bit to 1, which means that the next time the haystack system actually sees the flags, it will see the delete bit and it will automatically conclude that the needle has been deleted. Then the regular fields, we have the size field, number of bytes, the data of the photo, the actual data of the photo, and a checksum to just verify that if a single bit or a single byte has been corrupted or a few bytes have been corrupted, it allows us error detection and recovery. So the mapping between the photo ID, where the ID of a photo, and the needle's fields, the offset, the size, etc., is kept in memory. So the memory, we have a mapping, we have an index from the photo ID to the corresponding needle. And so the aim of the cookie was mentioned, the cookie field was mentioned, that is hard to guess the URL of a photo. So now let us come to the write and delete operations. So for the write operation, we provide the logical volume ID, which of course we get from the haystack directory, the key and the alternate key, the cookie, which is a random number, and the data of the photo. Once we have all of this, we go for the write. Each machine, each physical machine, updates its in-memory metadata index. It creates a needle and it writes the data. Right? So each machine independently that stores the associated physical volume updates its in-memory metadata index, creates the needle, writes the data. And since a photo is never modified, if we remove red eyes, rotate the image, a new image is created and is saved with the same key and alternate key, right? So with the same pair of keys, we save it, but it's just that in the metadata which is stored in memory, sorry, in the metadata that's stored in memory, previously we were pointing to one needle, we just changed the mapping to the new needle. Photo delete, well, we have discussed this in the past, that we set a single bit in the volume file and the in-memory data structure to indicate that the file, the specific needle, the photo associated with the needle has been deleted. So let us now discuss the structure of the index file. So the index file is used to create the in-memory data structure. So while doing a reboot of a machine, the index file is created. So it is essentially a checkpoint. So it is either created or it is read. So it works like a checkpoint of the in-memory data structure. So the in-memory data structure, what we do is we read the index file, we map it into memory, and that becomes the in-memory index. This has a similar organization. We have a super block and again a set of needles, where in this case a needle is essentially a pointer to the needle in the data file. Right, again a set of needles. Okay, so all of these are needles. So the index file and the data file are kind of updated asynchronously. So it's not like we take a lock or a semaphore or something and update both in tandem. So the both of them might not be in sync all the time. So the application is aware of that. So of course the data file is primary and the index file is kind of secondary. So that is kept in mind. So one thing that we do is after a reboot, the store machine first runs a job to bring the index file in sync with the data file. After that, for a long time, it does remain in sync, gradually asynchronous. Some amount of asynchronicity keeps up, but then again, when the load kind of reduces, they're again brought in sync. So we can say that the lag between the index file and the data file is kind of variable, but definitely either periodically or after a reboot, we ensure that we read the data file and ensure that all the entries that are not there in the index are brought in. One advantage is that since the data file is updated sequentially, it's like a stack, right? It's updated in a sequence, and the index file is also updated in a sequence. So we can pretty much say that there is a one-to-one mapping between the data file and the index file updates. So the index file updates that we couldn't actually do in a given time frame, if we just queue them, then they will also be in the same order. So what we need to do is we need to apply them to the index file in the same order, and finding out how many outstanding updates are remaining, that's actually very easy. You just need to check the size of the queue, and or we just keep a count. So let's say if the data file is in 200 updates and index file is seen 190, then we know that the 10 most recent updates to the data file are not there in the index file. That is subject to the fact that we apply the updates in order, and given that the data structure is also inherently sequential, this can easily be done to simplify the entire process. So the file system, the underlying file system, well, store machine should use a file system that allows them to perform a quick random seek on a large file. So note that these are not sequential accesses, these are random accesses, random seeks. So the store machine uses a variant of, it's a little known Unix file system called the extent file system. So in the extent file system, it's a normal file system. What happens is that we allocate space at the level of disk blocks, and a disk block could be 512 bytes, could be half a KB, 1 KB, 2 KB, not more than that. But in the case of XFS, we typically allocate chunks, blocks, uh, where I mean essentially in a much larger chunk, right? In a much larger chunk, and so maybe at the level of 1 GB, and create a block map for it. A block map is the index corresponding to the chunk that has been allocated. So what we do is maybe we allocate a 1 GB chunk, and then we create a small block map for it, which again can be cached in main memory. So this means that if we have all the indexes over here, and then we, let's say, run out of space on the data file, we give it a new extent, and a new extent, let's say, is in 1 GB extent. We create a small block map for it, which again extends the index, and this small block map kind of stores pointers to all the needles in the newly allocated storage. So this also allows us for efficient pre-allocation of files if we are kind of aware of their sizes before the data comes. Also, what we can also do is that if we have an approximate idea of the size of a photo, let's say that they're 100 KB, more or less, then we can kind of allocate 120 KB needles over here, such that there'll be some amount of internal fragmentation, but then we can quickly reserve space for them and quickly insert them at the relevant needles. So these things can be done. They are kind of optimizations to the baseline uh, Facebook photo storage file system. So they have not been discussed in very great detail in the paper. Recovery from failures. So a background task called Pitchfork runs. This periodically checks the health of each stored machine. So how does it do that? It attempts to read data from the stored machine. If it finds a problem or thinks that the disk is not accessible, problem in the disk, problem in the network, it maps the machine as read only, which means that new writes are not sent to the machine, right? And then we try to fix the problem, and if the machine is and if right and if the machine is otherwise fine, which means that it is possible to fix the problem either via rebooting or by doing some kind of a configuration change. If we can fix the machine, then we start a bulk sync operation from another replica to synchronize both the data as well as the index files. Some optimizations over here which are due. Compaction. We reclaim the space of deleted needles or duplicate needles. How do we do that? Well, so the only way is we don't create holes in an existing file. We take the old volume file and we dynamically move all the valid entries to a new volume file. So let's say few of these entries are invalid, doesn't matter. So this entry goes here, this goes here, this goes here, right? So we dynamically kind of compact it. So over a year, roughly 25% of photos get deleted. So this is the amount of compaction that we can do. Along with that, photos get modified because we make changes to them, like rotating them, removing red eyes, applying filters, and so on. One more thing that we can do is that we can, for a deleted photo, instead of setting the flag bit to 0, we can set its offset to 0, which is like a special code being given, which tells us that look, a photo has been deleted. So on an average for each photo, so mind you, we have 4 photos. One photo actually produces 4 photos, a large, a medium, a small, and a thumbnail. For each of them, we spend roughly 10 bytes. So we have a total of 40 bytes of main memory, 40 bytes of metadata main memory that we save per photos. And also we try to sequentialize the writes, because traditional storage devices such as commodity hard disks group photos into albums, and so we thus try to sequentialize the writes as much as possible, increases the performance at the server side. So if I were to plot the cumulative percentage of accesses, the y-axis with the age of the photo, which is a graph that we have been referring to, and this is also the kind of locality behavior. The shape of the curve is something like a times 1 minus e to the power minus bx, kind of a general curve of this type. So a curve of this type is something which kind of has an asymptote, a strictly defined asymptote. And so what we see is 90% of the cumulative accesses, right, all the accesses, are less than 600 days old. So roughly within 1.5 years, we access 90% of the accesses fall within that, which means we definitely do not access old photos. And if you see the chart in the paper, you will find that within 3 months or so, almost all photos are accessed. Otherwise, their access probability reduces to very, very low levels, right? So given that, some statistics, so of course data publication is 2010. So in 2010, 120 million photos were uploaded per day. So this means and 1.44 billion haystack photos were written. So how does this come? So 120 billion, which is 0.12 billion into 12. So how does 12 come? The factor of 12. So this is equal to 1.44. The factor of 12 comes from two numbers. So first is that there are 3 replicas of each logical volume. So we write it thrice. And 4 is because every photo is stored in 4 separate sizes: large, medium, small, and thumbnail. So that's the reason even if 120 million photos were uploaded per day, 1.44 billion haystack photos were written, and roughly during this time period 100 billion photos were viewed. The view stats, 85%, most of them are view stats for small photos, 10% are thumbnails. So these are the ones that you see on a typical Facebook wall. And the large photos, which are ones that we kind of expand and see, are only 5% of the views, right? And so that kind of gives us some kind of a statistical estimate of how the photo store is internally optimized to deal with them. Read and write operations. Well, the read and write operations are the majority of operations are reads in a Facebook-like system. So one is that we are actively accessing a photo. The other is that, let's say, if I just visit my friend's profile, I get to see hundreds of photos even though I actually don't want to see them, right? The the Facebook page is kind of full of photos. I see photos of friends, many things he has been doing, photos of friends, all of that, but I'm not really interested in all of them. But nevertheless, I see them. The writes in comparison, so uploads are far fewer, and as you have seen, an upload is also a more expensive operation because we need to give it a logical volume, and then multiple writes have to be done to the physical volume. And given every photo, we have to generate 4 versions of it. So all of that requires effort, right? Requires time, and but thankfully writes are not as frequent as reads, and there are almost no deletes, in the sense deletes are few and infrequent. We can deal with them. One of the interesting observations is that reads are much slower than writes. So the one of the reasons is that, of course, writes are kind of off the critical path. We can quickly write something to a cache and come back, and gradually the write will kind of percolate deeper into the system. In comparison, reads are on the critical path, so we directly need to go to the machine and we need to do the read. Right? Writes in many cases can be cached in memory. Alright, so you can write to memory and say that, look, later on the data from memory will get persisted to disk. But in read, we'll have to go and perform the disk read to actually get the data. And the read times were kind of high, 10 milliseconds, but the write times were small, 1.5 milliseconds. So this paper was published in OSDI in 2010. And of course, after that, Facebook itself has grown significantly, right? So Facebook is no more the Facebook of 2010. So in 2010, I still remember that a lot of people were still not using Facebook to that extent, and so they, I mean, Facebook was kind of coming up those days. But nowadays, of course, Facebook is ubiquitous. So everybody has a Facebook page, and a lot of major updates are being sent on Facebook page. Academic institutions have their Facebook pages. Everybody has them. Celebrities have them. Politicians have them. Policies are discussed on Facebook. So in fact, if you're not on Facebook, it appears that you don't exist. So this was not there 10 years ago. So 10 years ago itself, we're looking at so many photos, billion plus updates. So nowadays in the current regime, things are, of course, an order of magnitude more, but many of these things are not documented. So we'll have to wait for Facebook to publish more papers such that we get an idea how they handle today's scale and what modifications they have had to do to actually handle data and traffic in today's scale.